Hey everyone, Luke here. Now before we get into the review, just want to say a couple of little things. In case you aren't aware, the live stream that me and Polydrums were going to be doing today for the chapters, that's not happening today, which is why this is coming a little bit earlier than what normally happens, because the Super Bowl's on in America, so he's watching that, but it will be coming during the week that's coming up, so keep your eyes out for that, and maybe in the week he might actually see the review, so he might actually have some comments to say when we actually do get to talking about the Dr. Stone chapter, when we get to that section of the live stream. But for now, let's just get right into it. Okay, so this will be chapter 229, titled Whyman, which is kind of appropriate because this is a chapter where they actually come to the realization of what Whyman is. Like, well, we already know what Whyman is, but like what its motivations were, why it actually petrified the Earth in the first place, and more importantly, something else that I really thought that they weren't actually going to touch upon, but I'm glad that they actually did. But while we do get some of the answers, we don't exactly get all the answers. Like, for one thing, in this chapter, we don't actually know who invented these Medusas in the first place. Like, who came up with this crazy hypothesis of like, maybe we want to not be going through the concept of death, and maybe I want to be alive. Like, so who actually created these Medusas in the first place? That's still a question that's left up in the air, which we probably will get in the next chapter, but at least we get some ideas, some indication of what Whyman's motivations are and what his true allegiance are. Well, I shouldn't be saying he, because it's not really it doesn't really have a gender, it's a genderless villain, so but I think we're gonna stick with just saying he or it. It just makes things a little bit simple, but yeah. So we do get we do get a bit of its motivations, but we still need some answers as well. But anyway, moving into the chapter itself, we have the explanation of what Whyman, like how it actually operated in the first place. So we have Whyman searches for intelligent organisations to parasite, which obviously refers to us. So yeah, pretty much establishing like Whyman sees us like humans and sees like, oh yeah, we're intelligent species, so we can like mooch off human intelligence ourselves to also better ourselves, which will probably explains like how it was able to pick up so much intelligence, because they say to do this. The search method is simple. Electromagnetic waves are an inevitable force for advanced civilization, meaning if the waves emanate from a planet demonstrating any regularity. So basically saying like, okay, yeah, humans are down there, they're intelligent species, so we can mooch off them, but in order to do that, we've got to petrify them and turn them into stone so that they're not advancing too much for us, and we can like absorb every bit of their intelligence. So that's probably what Whyman is getting at here by saying like, yeah, we're searching for intelligent organisms to parasite off. So yeah, pretty much being like a parasitic force in this regard. And also the fact that it does it through electromagnetic waves makes a lot of sense, because we have all electrical magnetic currents just flowing through the earth, and also radio waves, as we see like the communication devices. So like we see Senku's radio antenna when he was like building the rocket when he was a kid. We see various people on their mobile phones or cell phones if you're in America, just letting off electromagnetic waves, radio waves up to Whyman. It's just like feeding off of that notion. Although that raises a question of itself. If Whyman needed like electromagnetic waves or radio waves to actually function at this point, why would it need to petrify people at this point? Like, that's a question of itself, and maybe I'm missing something there. Maybe Party Jones can bring it up when he actually talks about it in the live stream later on in the week. So anyway, moving on, we actually see some Medusas or parts of the Whyman falling down to Earth, and obviously because they're invisible to radio waves, nobody detects them. And the first thing that they do come in contact with is the sparrows, which end up petrifying them. And I think as well, because it's no, I think it actually comes up later on in the chapter as well. But yeah, it's the fact that they're actually addressing the sparrow incident that made me really happy in the chapter, because I was worried that they weren't actually going to address this point, because it was like a bit of a head scratch. It's like, why sparrows of all things? But thankfully we do get an answer in this chapter. So yeah, we get the title page which just shows Tokyo. Is Mount Fuji behind Tokyo? Let me know. Let me know. Actually, let me look it up. Where is Mount Fuji? Uh, Let me just look it up quickly, guys. So come on. Mount Fuji location. Yeah, it's in Tokyo. So yeah, we have Tokyo and then Mount Fuji in the background there. From modern day, so like we've had flashbacks from when Whyman was first initiating its attack on humanity 3,700 years ago, and then we cut over to Stanley Crocker and Senku basically staring down the massive blob of Whyman as Senku says, talking about 3,700 years back. The story does sure bring back memories, and this is where we get the question that I think Inagaki and Boichi were kind of expecting people to be asking this question, like the first question that people would be asking, and it's very, very much Senku speaking for the audience here because that is pretty much the first question we had about all of this phenomenon in itself. So why did you turn sparrows to stone before humanity? Yeah, bravo, because I think some authors would have probably forgotten about that and probably would have been like, oh crap, yeah, that did happen. Gotta rework something here and kind of add it in later. But yeah, thankfully Senku was able to remember, like, oh yeah, sparrows, they got petrified before us, so maybe we should ask that question. Maybe that should be the first thing on our minds. And yeah, that was the first thing on their minds. And he questions if it was a test run before the Whyman confirms that it was standard paracetamol process. So basically, it was just I guess just like I guess it really was just a test run there, but just a standard test run to see if it would actually work, as well as they intended it to happen. That's probably what it's getting at here. As yeah, it seems like it was an advanced test one because they say the advanced party chose an Abattaria species. Target was based on the DNA of those fortune organisms. So basically, kind of a random attack, but not exactly. Like it was pinpoint, like exactly on the spells itself. And this is where Chelsea gets the idea of like that maybe Whyman is basically saying like fortunate, like they were lucky to be petrified. So basically saying that, so the spells were lucky to be petrified and lucky to like be frozen in stone, frozen in time for all eternity and have an everlasting life. Yeah, there's something else fishy going on here. But yeah, livestock, we actually get a reason as to why it was spells that, of all the animals in the world, that it was actually spells that the ones that were actually picked. So it was just based on the DNA. So basically, simply like just a optional test run, but one that makes it very shocking. Of like it was as if the spells were asking to be were asking not to die and being fortunate enough to not be pet. Although, how long do spells actually live? Sparrow lifespan. Okay, so sparrows only live for about 3 years, so maybe that was the nature of the Whyman. Like it paints the one animal in the world that had some form of intelligence, like hyper advanced intelligence, but was an animal that had a short lifespan. So maybe that was the idea behind its attack on the spells in the first place. So if that's the case, then yeah, I can kind of see why it would be picking out spells in that regard, because of the fact that they have such a short lifespan and the petrification mean can like extend that beyond the superficial qualities of what spells are actually capable of. And this way again gives his belief of that turning everyone to stone and enjoying a permanent deathless existence is a cause for celebration. So basically giving the idea in Whyman of like, hey, if we can get humans petrified and basically making sure that they're not dead, then that's a cause for celebration. But at the same time, that's basically playing God with people's lives, and yeah, that is something we do not want. Like, us as humans, we kind of, even though some of us do fear death, we kind of know it's the natural order of things, that you're born, you live, you die. That's kind of the circle of life, but that's what makes us But that's what makes us human, that we're willing to accept that when our time comes, our time does come, and we're able to move on and look forward to the future. But the Whyman is kind of interfering with that by basically deciding for us, like, no, you are not going to die. You are going to be petrified. You're going to have this immortality, and maybe some of us don't want immortality, because while we would like the idea of immortality, that is a scary thing to know that no matter what, you're never going to know what's beyond this lifetime if you're immortal and you don't have the capacity to actually die itself. That's just a scary thought in of itself. Also, something that me and Polyjohn's forgotten to bring up in our last review, the fact that Gen is saying in this chapter that is talking about basically a permanent deathless existence, that basically could give away the notion of, like, oh yeah, humans are immortal, and that could actually lead to a civil war between people who don't want to die, and between people who see immortality as the next evolution of humanity and science itself. That could lead to some very interesting conversations later down the line, but that's a discussion for another day. Moving on with the chapter, they continue on by saying the petrification waves, which trigger an elemental phase change or appear as light on the visible spectrum, only to the chosen target. Okay, so this actually explains why nobody saw the petrification light in the sky itself when the spells were being petrified. So to them it's just like a simple, like, what, like the spells were flying and then all of a sudden they were stone. So yeah, the fact that only spells could actually see the light when it was being emanated to them as the targets, that answers a lot of questions of, like, why no one actually saw this coming in the first place. So yeah, congratulations for and that actually does make a lot of sense as well, because there's some animals there are some animals who can see who can only see light on a visible spectrum different from other animals, like cats and dogs can see different lights on a spectrum different to humans as well. So that's a pretty standard scientific explanation. Yeah, and again, the fact that we actually got that answer really makes me happy. So yeah, we got that answer of, like, why no one else saw the light when the sparrows were being petrified. As we get various flashbacks to everyone just, like, discovering the sparrows, including Taiju, Senku, and a few other random characters. And glad that we actually get the flashback to when Taiju actually found the sparrow in the first chapter. So yeah, that's a pretty interesting detail that I'm glad that they brought back. And they continue on by saying the most intelligent species on the planet is the one that recognizes petrification grants eternal life. The same species that immediately started discussing the matter via electromagnetic waves, humanity. So yeah, as soon as they discovered the petrification was causing humanity, I think that's why my mind concluded, like, oh yeah, humanity is the most intelligent species on this planet. So yeah, it was a pretty direct attack on humanity in the first place. So now we know Whyman was basically trying to keep us all in stone all this time to prevent us from dying, but also to have dictatorship basically over our status as humans, as being creatures who born, live, and die. So yeah, they could continue on by saying they are magical targets for the main force to parasitize, as we see just like Medusa Whyman just flooding all the Earth, and we see a notion, not an ocean, a street of people just being turned stone, as we get like a different kind of wave. It's sort of like just like a tidal wave that's just flowing straight in a straight line. And nice little detail that we have here is that in the background you see like a Whyman on display there on the screen. So nice little detail that we've got in there. They could and continue on. The explanation is the stone is made so that it's easy to undo when more brain power is used and maximized, which makes sense. Like some people, like at certain points, because Stanley and Xenu didn't have the revival fluid or anything, and they were able to break out the stone. So the stone itself is actually just fragile, and anybody with no willpower and muscle mass can just break out whenever they wanted. Which is a nice detail that I glad that they actually brought up. And they continue on by saying the individuals would then not be able to resist the allure of eternal life, especially Xenu. Xenu where Cena would not be able to resist that fascinating elegance of like this Medusa can grant us eternal life. Now, whether or not they actually want that remains to be a whole other story. We then get a flashback of like Byakuya and his time on Treasure Island before we cut to 3,000 years later. Yeah, about 3,000 years later. So about 700 years before Senku actually woke up, as we see various inhabitants of Treasure Island going about their business, and the caption says the people of Treasure Island produce electrical magnetic waves with regularity by polishing ores normally too minor to detect. Unknown to them, their hair accessories acted as a Doppler antenna amplifying the waves. Okay, so their hair accessories amplified the waves, so that got Whyman's attention. Now, who do I know has a hair accessory on her head permanently? That's right, Yuzuriya. So Yuzuriya was working with the Whyman all along. I knew it. Everything just falls completely into place. Well, actually, that does make a lot of sense now that you think about it, because her headband is basically just like a beacon of like, I'm here all the time. So yeah, I wasn't right all along. Yuzuriya's headband was the key to everything in this series. Whether or not that will be brought up, that remains to be seen. But yeah, inhabitants of Treasure Island are actually being detected by the Whyman, who's like waves, revived individuals, or survivors, never petrified. So it's basically saying like, wait a minute, these survivors were never petrified. Oh, we can't have that. Oh, we can't have that happening. So that's when it actually sent down the wave of Medusas to Treasure Island, and to properly parasite humanity, the humans needed to be taught how to activate the waves that would petrify their own kind. So yeah, basically being taught like, hey, in order for us to feed off your life energy or your source of energy or parasite off you guys, yeah, we need to tell you exactly how we're going to actually basically turn you into stone. Which is when Whyman communicated via the radio waves. Therefore, those same diplomatic antennas that emitted the weak signal could receive messages at the same frequency. So we have basically it's one inhabitant of Treasure Island who may or may not be related to Amaryllis, like an ancestor of Amaryllis. But seems to be someone who kind of looks like her, just like a younger version of her. But yeah, they seem to be, the Whyman seems to be communicating with them via their antenna, and basically like, okay, to activate the thing in front of you, you need to say these exact coordinates, 1 meter, 1 second, and they do that, which ends up making them being petrified. Before we cut back to the present day, where we see Gen saying most likely these beings have no concept of negotiation. They view eternal life as an irresistible offer. Yeah, basically what I've been saying, like they basically just see it as like a cut and dry, like humanity is gonna love this, it's gonna love the eternal life, without taking into the fact that some humans do not want that, and actually can be actually fearful of actually being immortal in the first place. So we cut back to when Senku first broke out of the storm, before we get various flashbacks, including when Senku was building fire, when Sino and Stanley and Maya were actually building up the American colonies, and when Taiju found Senku and Yuzuriya. And also the most tragic of them is when we get cut back to Senku looking at Byakuya's grave, and this is where I kind of get go back to what I was saying before about people actually viewing immortality as like this is a bad thing, because the fact that Senku's immortal now but Byakuya wasn't, means that Byakuya never got a chance to say goodbye to Senku in the first place, because of what Whyman actually did to everyone. Before we cut over to Treasure Island again, where we see Ibarra possibly after he petrified the master of Treasure Island and taken the Medusa in the first place. As we get a caption that says, they showed no inclination towards cultivating the devices. Far from being able to produce more of them, humanity could not so much as replace their batteries. Perhaps humanity lacked the necessary intelligence. Were they incorrect species to parasite? So basically the Whyman debating of like, oh wait, the humans can't reproduce our batteries. Well, yes, we could have before you guys actually petrified us all in the first place, but yeah, so it's kind of your fault in the first place that you're not getting the diamond batteries, and they're coming to the conclusion that maybe humanity wasn't as intelligent as they initially anticipated, and maybe it was like a bad idea to like parasite over them and petrify them in the first place. Before continuing by saying they emit only minor electromagnetic waves. Were they just an inferior species? No, they weren't just an inferior species. You just basically took them back to the Stone Age and took them back to the caveman ages, which basically reduced their level of intelligence more and more. And it's only when Senku and other scientists started to wake up where that actually kind of got back to some sort of like modern day tech. As Senku says, we're making GPs. It'll shoot out crazy strong radio waves before we get Whyman saying they are capable of producing strong electromagnetic waves. They do not lack intelligence, and yet why do they not pursue eternal life? Why do they not yearn to be petrified? Why? Before we get Senku saying, I've been dying to meet you, as we get the catcher saying, that day was the opening of humanity's negotiations with Whyman, and that's where the chapter ends. So, not really a lot going on in this chapter. It's more like an exposition chapter of like what Whyman's true motivation actually was. So yeah, it was basically that Whyman basically saw this as like the petrification in eternal life as more of like the next step in humanity's evolution, so that it could produce more, so that it can like live on forever, so that it can basically help out Whyman by basically giving them the diamond batteries. But when it discovered that humanity was like not for that eternal life, that was basically the question of like, why don't you want to be petrified? Why don't you want the eternal life? Why? So we finally got the main motivation for Whyman, like why it was doing what it was doing in the first place. And yeah, next chapter we're probably going to get from the human side now, like, hey, we don't want to be petrified. Don't want eternal life because we want to be able to like pass on, but also pass on through the generations after generations that are going to come before us. So something like that. But maybe Whyman might not be able to understand that and be like, well, if you're alive, then you can pass it on and be alive and sharing that discovery with them. That probably will be something that will actually be discovered. But Whyman can't seem to grasp the concept of like why humans do want to die, why some of them don't fear death, and why they feel like immortality is a bad thing, as demonstrated here. Because if you're immortal, then basically you're seeing everyone around you die, and eventually you're going to be alone. You're going to be alone yourself, as demonstrated by flashing back to when Senku was at Byakuya's grave. The fact that Senku is immortal now. But, immortal as much as can be, but Byakuya means that he never got to actually say goodbye to Byakuya. He never got to be with him till the end, and that's very tragic in that regard. But, yeah, now where does this leave us? Now, again, some questions that need to be answered is where these things actually came from in the first place, who created them. Like, that's the thing that we still need to find out, like, who created them, who had the, because somebody had to have had this concept of like, hey, we're humans, we're always dying, but maybe if we eliminate that concept, maybe the whole world might be a better place. Maybe that's what that person was getting at, and they kind of like installed that into Whyman itself. That's something we need to find out, like who created the Whyman in the first place, where did they first come from? Yeah, and that's probably something we might actually discuss when we get to the live stream, me and Pie Jams, but that's a discussion for another day. But what did you guys think of this chapter? Let me know. Like, subscribe, comment, all that jazz. And this will be Lasher Luke signing off. Later, guys.